The Yuuzhan Vong invasion, had it occurred during the height of the Galactic Empire, would have unleashed a cascade of complex reactions from the galaxy's dominant power. The Empire, with its iron grip and centralized structure, was uniquely positioned to respond to such a threat with unparalleled ruthlessness and efficiency. Central to this hypothetical scenario would be the role of the Chiss Ascendancy, whose intelligence and vigilance in the unknown regions would likely serve as the first line of defense. As a species whose territory bordered the space from which the Yuuzhan Vong would launch their incursion, the Chiss would act as an early warning system, alerting the Empire to the arrival of this extragalactic menace. The Chiss, with their structured and methodical approach to warfare, would perceive the Yuuzhan Vong as a grave threat almost immediately. Their reports to the Empire, though likely filtered through careful diplomacy, would convey the scope and scale of the enemy's biological technologies and their fanatical commitment to conquest. Grand Admiral Thrawn, who was uniquely attuned to both the Chiss and the workings of the Empire, would likely have been a key figure in ensuring that these warnings reached Emperor Palpatine without delay. Upon receiving these warnings, Emperor Palpatine would act swiftly, for the Yuuzhan Vong's devotion to destruction and disdain for artificial technology would pose a challenge unlike any other the galaxy had faced. Palpatine's strength as a ruler lay in his ability to foresee threats and position himself to either exploit or destroy them. In this case, his response would center on the swift and overwhelming application of force, orchestrated through his most trusted enforcer, Darth Vader. Recognizing the magnitude of the threat, Palpatine would order Vader to oversee the mustering of a vast Imperial fleet at Kuat, the galaxy's premier shipyard and a symbol of Imperial power. The choice of Kuat would not be arbitrary. Its massive orbital facilities and deep space construction platforms would allow the rapid assembly of a fleet capable of engaging the Yuuzhan Vong on their own terms. Hundreds of Imperial-class star destroyers, each a devastating force of destruction, would be drawn from across the galaxy and supplemented by multiple superstar destroyers, the Empire's most potent symbols of military dominance. This fleet would not merely be a show of strength, but a calculated effort to meet the Yuuzhan Vong head-on. The Empire's strategic doctrine under Palpatine emphasized overwhelming force to crush opposition, and the fleet at Kuat would embody this philosophy. The sheer size of the fleet would serve as a deterrent, but the Empire would also recognize that the Yuuzhan Vong's unyielding nature meant they would not be swayed by displays of power alone. Direct confrontation would be inevitable. Vader, ever loyal and efficient in his execution of the Emperor's will, would take personal charge of this mobilization. His presence at Kuat would ensure that the assembly proceeded without delay or dissent. The workers, engineers, and officers at Kuat would toil under the shadow of the Dark Lord of the Sith, their efforts driven by the knowledge that failure would not be tolerated. The result would be a fleet unmatched in size and firepower, ready to strike at the heart of the Yuuzhan Vong invasion. As the fleet gathered, the Empire would also turn its attention to intelligence and reconnaissance. The Yuuzhan Vong's organic technology and unusual tactics would require the Empire to adapt its traditional methods of warfare. Palpatine would likely order the Imperial Security Bureau and the Inquisitorius to collaborate with Thrawn, whose insights into alien strategies would be invaluable. Thrawn's intimate understanding of art and culture as a means to predict enemy behavior would be a vital tool in countering the Yuuzhan Vong's unorthodox approach. The Empire's leadership would likely view the Yuuzhan Vong as a dual opportunity and threat. For Palpatine, the conflict could be used to further consolidate power, suppress dissent, and eliminate any lingering elements of the rebellion. The need for unity against an external foe would provide justification for even harsher measures against systems that resisted Imperial rule. Simultaneously, the Emperor's obsession with the dark side and his search for ultimate control over life and death might drive him to seek an understanding of the Yuuzhan Vong's biological technologies and their apparent immunity to the Force. The initial engagements between the Empire and the Yuuzhan Vong would set the tone for the conflict. The Yuuzhan Vong, with their mastery of bioengineered weaponry and their unwavering zeal, would undoubtedly inflict heavy losses on the Empire's forces in the early stages. However, the Empire's capacity for rapid adaptation and mass production of war material would give it a critical edge. The Star Destroyers assembled at Kuat would spearhead counterattacks, using overwhelming firepower to neutralize the Yuuzhan Vong's fleets. Key battles would take place over strategic worlds, with Coruscant undoubtedly becoming a focal point for the Empire's efforts to repel the invaders. The capital, as the heart of the Empire, would be fortified to an unprecedented degree. Planetary shields, orbital defense platforms, and the presence of superstar destroyers in orbit would create a near-impenetrable barrier against the Yuuzhan Vong's advance. Palpatine's propaganda machine would simultaneously work to frame the conflict as a righteous crusade to protect the galaxy from a barbaric invader, rallying the population to support the war effort. Through this combination of military might, strategic planning, and propaganda, the Empire would gradually push back the Yuuzhan Vong, albeit at great cost. The conflict would strain the Empire's resources and expose weaknesses in its rigid hierarchy, but it would also showcase the effectiveness of its centralized command structure in responding to existential threats. Palpatine's manipulation of the situation would likely result in an even tighter grip on the galaxy, with any surviving opposition to his rule crushed under the pretext of maintaining stability. For the Yuuzhan Vong, the Empire's sheer scale and technological prowess would present challenges they had not anticipated. Their reliance on unconventional tactics and overwhelming zeal would prove insufficient against the relentless tide of Imperial reinforcements. The deployment of superstar destroyers, such as the Executor and its sister ships, would serve as a turning point, their firepower devastating entire fleets of Yuuzhan Vong vessels in single engagements. Despite the Yuuzhan Vong's fierce resistance, the Empire's ability to sustain prolonged conflict would ultimately tip the balance. Palpatine's control over the galaxy's industrial base and Vader's unyielding pursuit of victory would ensure that the Empire retained the upper hand. The war would leave the galaxy scarred and battered, but the Empire would emerge victorious, its dominance reaffirmed through the annihilation of the Yuuzhan Vong. The arrival of the Yuuzhan Vong, a foe whose sheer ferocity and advanced biological technologies presented an existential threat, would have forced Emperor Palpatine to re-evaluate his arsenal of superweapons. While the Death Star and its terrifying planet-destroying capabilities were iconic symbols of the Empire's strength, the nature of the Yuuzhan Vong invasion would have necessitated a different approach. Against an enemy whose tactics revolved around vast fleets of bioengineered vessels and swarms of warships, the development of the Eclipse-class superstar destroyer would become a top priority. Palpatine, ever the strategist, would recognize the Eclipse as the ideal weapon to counter the Yuuzhan Vong threat. Unlike the Death Star, which was designed to obliterate planetary targets and enforce submission through fear, the Eclipse was built for fleet engagements. Its immense size and overwhelming firepower were designed to dominate space battles, but it was the inclusion of a scaled-down superlaser that truly set it apart. This weapon, though not as powerful as the Death Star's main cannon, was still capable of annihilating entire fleets or reducing massive capital ships to slag in a single shot. The superlaser of the Eclipse would be especially effective against the Yuuzhan Vong's fleet strategies. Their reliance on organic technology and their disdain for artificial constructs meant their vessels were often less durable than Imperial designs, though their adaptability and regenerative capabilities posed a unique challenge. Against such a foe, the Eclipse's superlaser would provide a devastating countermeasure, cutting through Yuuzhan Vong warships with precision strikes that could decimate their formations and render their numerical advantage moot. The urgency of the Yuuzhan Vong invasion would likely lead Palpatine to accelerate the Eclipse's production, bypassing typical bureaucratic delays and diverting resources from other projects. Kuat drive yards, already tasked with assembling the Imperial fleet, would be pressed into service as the primary construction site for the Eclipse. Vader, overseeing operations at Kuat, would ensure the ship's completion under the Emperor's direct orders. Palpatine's foresight in advancing the Eclipse program would be seen as a masterstroke, as the ship's capabilities would soon prove indispensable in the war against the Yuuzhan Vong. The presence of the Eclipse on the battlefield would have a profound psychological effect on both sides. For the Yuuzhan Vong, whose religion and warrior culture viewed technology with disdain, the sight of such a colossal machine would be both infuriating and terrifying. The devastating power of its superlaser, capable of obliterating their largest warships or entire fleets, would force them to adapt their tactics, though their fanatical resolve would likely drive them to seek direct engagements regardless of the cost. For the Empire, the Eclipse would serve as a symbol of unassailable power, a testament to Palpatine's ability to defend his galaxy against even the most alien of threats. Its deployment would reinforce the narrative of the Empire as the galaxy's sole bulwark against chaos, justifying further consolidation of power and the continued suppression of dissent. The Eclipse would embody the Emperor's vision of absolute control, its every action demonstrating that resistance to the Empire, be it from rebellious citizens or extragalactic invaders, was futile. In battle, the Eclipse would play a pivotal role in turning the tide against the Yuuzhan Vong. Its superlaser, combined with the massive firepower of its turbolaser batteries and its impenetrable defenses, would make it the ultimate fleet killer. When paired with the hundreds of Imperial-class star destroyers and other superstar destroyers gathered at Kuat, the Eclipse would anchor the Imperial fleet, serving as both a command center and a weapon of mass destruction. Palpatine's personal investment in the Eclipse would also extend to its symbolic importance. He would likely appear, either in person or through holographic projection, to oversee its first deployment, ensuring its success became a key moment in the Empire's propaganda campaign. The destruction of a massive Yuuzhan Vong fleet by the Eclipse's superlaser would be broadcast across the galaxy, cementing the Empire's reputation as the ultimate protector against external threats. The prioritization of the Eclipse's completion would also highlight the Empire's adaptability in the face of unprecedented challenges. While the Yuuzhan Vong invasion would strain Imperial resources and reveal vulnerabilities in its rigid command structure, Palpatine's decision to accelerate the Eclipse program would exemplify his ability to respond decisively. By focusing on the production of this unparalleled warship, the Emperor would ensure that the Empire maintained its technological and strategic edge, even against a foe as unpredictable and deadly as the Yuuzhan Vong. Ultimately, the Eclipse would become a key factor in the Empire's eventual victory. Its ability to neutralize entire fleets in a single strike would offset the Yuuzhan Vong's numerical superiority, allowing the Empire to reclaim lost territory and push the invaders back into the unknown regions. The ship's role in these battles would become the stuff of legend, a symbol of Imperial strength that outlived even the Yuuzhan Vong War. The construction and deployment of the Eclipse would also serve as a cautionary tale for the galaxy. While it would ensure the Empire's survival against the Yuuzhan Vong, its existence would further cement the totalitarian nature of Palpatine's rule. As the Eclipse loomed over the galaxy, it would remind all who beheld it that the Emperor's will was absolute, and that nothing, be it rebellious citizens, alien invaders, or the limits of science itself, could stand in his way. The Empire's response to the Yuuzhan Vong invasion would have been defined by its doctrine of overwhelming force, a strategy that was at the core of its military philosophy. Unlike the more nuanced and decentralized approaches favored by the Rebel Alliance or even the Galactic Republic, the Empire excelled at massing its resources and applying them with unrelenting precision. Against the Yuuzhan Vong, this would manifest as a relentless campaign designed to exploit chokepoints, overwhelm the invaders, and neutralize their numerical advantages. Palpatine's grand strategy would revolve around the concept of concentrated might, using the Empire's vast fleets and logistical resources to isolate and annihilate the Yuuzhan Vong forces. Early intelligence from the Chiss Ascendancy and reconnaissance operations conducted by the Empire would identify key routes through which the Yuuzhan Vong were advancing. These would include hyperspace vectors and regions where the invaders had established staging points for their organic fleets. The Empire's ability to control and dominate such spaces would be critical to turning the tide of the war. Darth Vader, entrusted by the Emperor with the task of commanding the main response fleet, would move swiftly to position Imperial forces along these strategic chokepoints. The Empire's unparalleled logistical network would come into play as star destroyers, superstar destroyers, and auxiliary support vessels were deployed in massive numbers to block Yuuzhan Vong advances. These choke points would serve as kill zones, where the Empire's overwhelming firepower could be brought to bear with devastating effect. One of the defining features of the Yuuzhan Vong was their preference for direct and aggressive assaults, relying on superior numbers, biological warships, and unorthodox tactics. While this approach often overwhelmed more conventional forces, the Empire's sheer scale and industrial output would allow it to outmatch even the Yuuzhan Vong's relentless attacks. The chokepoints would become scenes of apocalyptic battles, with Imperial fleets filling the void of space and concentrating their firepower on waves of Yuuzhan Vong ships. The narrow confines of these battle spaces would nullify the Yuuzhan Vong's mobility and limit their ability to outflank the Empire's forces. The Eclipse and its super laser would likely play a pivotal role in these engagements. Positioned at the heart of the Imperial formations, it would serve as both a command vessel and the ultimate fleet killer. As Yuuzhan Vong forces attempted to breach the chokepoints, the Eclipse would unleash devastating super laser strikes, annihilating entire clusters of enemy ships in single, calculated shots. These strikes, coupled with the sustained bombardment from hundreds of star destroyers, would shatter the Yuuzhan Vong formations and create chaos within their ranks. Imperial TIE fighters and bombers, deployed in staggering numbers, would swarm the Yuuzhan Vong vessels, exploiting any gaps in their defenses. Unlike traditional fleets that might falter against the Vong's unique organic countermeasures, the Empire's starfighters would be supported by overwhelming capital ship cover fire, ensuring that they could sustain their attacks. The Empire's ability to produce starfighters in near limitless quantities would further tip the balance, as attrition would favor the Imperial war machine over the Yuuzhan Vong's finite resources. The chokepoint strategy would also extend to ground warfare. On key worlds where the Yuuzhan Vong attempted to establish footholds, the Empire would deploy massive planetary garrisons supported by walkers, heavy artillery, and stormtrooper legions. Orbital bombardments from star destroyers would obliterate Vong forces as they attempted to reinforce their positions, while surface engagements would see the Empire leveraging its superior mechanized forces to crush the invaders. The Yuuzhan Vong's reliance on organic technology and hand-to-hand combat prowess would be rendered ineffective against the Empire's cold, calculating use of mechanized firepower. As the Empire forced the Yuuzhan Vong into increasingly desperate positions, the psychological toll on the invaders would begin to show. The Yuuzhan Vong's religious zeal and disdain for technology made them resistant to conventional intimidation, but the Empire's relentless application of force would gradually erode their resolve. The sight of entire fleets being annihilated, world ships destroyed, and entire armies incinerated under the Empire's guns would challenge even their fanatical belief in their gods. Palpatine's mastery of propaganda would also come into play, broadcasting the Empire's victories across the galaxy to bolster morale and solidify his grip on power. These victories would be presented as proof that only the Empire could protect the galaxy from existential threats, further justifying its authoritarian rule. The images of the Yuuzhan Vong being crushed at Imperial chokepoints would serve as a rallying cry, reinforcing the idea that resistance to the Emperor's rule was not only futile but self-destructive. The culmination of this strategy would see the Yuuzhan Vong forced into a final, decisive engagement. Isolated and surrounded, their remaining fleets would be drawn into a carefully orchestrated trap, where the full might of the Imperial Navy would descend upon them. The Eclipse, flanked by super-star destroyers and backed by waves of star destroyers, would lead the charge, obliterating the remnants of the Yuuzhan Vong armada in a display of absolute dominance. In the aftermath of these battles, the Empire's control over the galaxy would be stronger than ever. The Yuuzhan Vong, a threat unlike any other, would have been vanquished not through diplomacy or negotiation, but through the Empire's unparalleled capacity for total war. The strategy of overwhelming force and chokepoint annihilation would stand as a testament to the efficiency and ruthlessness of Palpatine's regime. For the galaxy, it would be a grim reminder of the price of safety under Imperial rule, as well as the devastating power the Empire could unleash when faced with an existential threat.